Hi, Denny again. This is the third part to the introduction to birth order. This is only the introduction. But sometimes the necessary place we need to go is to understand the mechanics. Now, there are many exceptions to the mechanics. We won't go into all the exceptions now, but some of them are like stillborn children, or the father conceived other children, mixed marriages, multiple relationship patterns, adopted children coming in, cousins coming to live, miscarriages, abortions. Lots of exceptions to how this works. But let's just start with the pure basic mechanics, and then we can explain how all of the other variables might affect it later. For now, just get familiar with the opposites here. There are opposites horizontally, meaning the number one girl in red is primarily what we call a yang or masculine type, more practical, more grounded, more material, more in the world, more externally directed. Opposite to this grounded, earth-oriented number one girl is what we call the air type, or the feeling-oriented, imaginative, more passive number one son. There is a opposite between a number one girl and a number one son. Obviously, they don't occur at the same time, but these differences are very important when you start to see combinations, like a number one son behind a girl, and so on. So opposites, get familiar with the feeling of the opposites. And I oftentimes refer to it like it's God's shoelaces. You'll see these alternating patterns going through the family. These polarities are linked. If you remove one of them in some form or another, it affects the dynamics of all of them. So this is how it works in this way. This is just the study of these individual characteristics of the universal pattern. So horizontal opposites and vertical opposites. What I mean by that is the number one son in blue, which is related to the mother's side of the family, now has a son that comes after him, a brother that comes after him. The father has a second son. This second son is now a polarity to his older brother. So how the older brother is more air-oriented, dreamy, imaginative, usually talks less. The number two son is like an opposite. So we call him the fire, or the bull, or the action-oriented. He's oftentimes, because he's of the yang pattern, red. He's from the father's family. So these are vertical opposites. Number one son, opposite to number two son. Now the pattern continues vertically, that the third son is very different than the second son, but has some similarities to the first son, but is different. You'll see the same pattern again, that number 5, also from the mother's family, corresponding in blue, these 3, 1, 3, and 5, they have similar attributes but are predictably different. By being able to respect these differences, you'll find that they learn differently, they have different automatic interests. You can help to guide them to experiences with toys or stories or experiences in nature that match their natural interest. So this is the nature of how it is vertically, and each one of these has a horizontal opposite as well. For example, the second son we referred to as the fire-oriented, emotionally, externally driven child. Oftentimes can be very physically aggressive or not, depending on the birth order patterns of the mother and the father, and that's another thing that changes some of this. All right, now the opposite, or the horizontal polarity to the fire type child, is now mirrored by the two-girl pattern, which is very different than the fire element. She's the water element. She's a feeling-oriented type. So her feeling orientation is more inward. That corresponds to the blue. Opposite to the externally driven red fire type, the second son, the second daughter is very different than the second son. First, middle, and last doesn't work this way. This one also, the second girl, is very different than her older sister. The older sister usually likes control of situations, telling other people what to do, directing social activity, talking more. Usually, this second daughter likes her own privacy, likes her own feelings, likes to be able to have things her own independent way. To understand these differences, she talks less. Sometimes she likes to play alone or with her imaginary friends. There are very distinct differences between the number one girl and the number two girl. Now this pattern continues in this polarity sequence where you have the number one girl. The number three girl is like the number one girl, but different in a very predictable way. The number three girl is different than the five girl, but they're similar in some way. 5, 3, and 1, all from the red or father side, they have similarities but predictable differences. Number 2 girl, number 4, and number 6, all of the blue, they are also a progression of different personalities, feelings, and all of these have different predictable body types. Now remember, these universal patterns that are related to the sequence of children, there is a universal quality and there are numerous, lots of variations depending on all of the exceptions. Now one of the exceptions I mentioned was the mother or the father being absent, or the mother and the father having a difficulty with their own parents in some form or another. So all of these exceptions, miscarriages, abortions, yes, they do influence this, but we'll be able to talk about the difference between the genetic universal pattern versus the gender number. For example, you might have a number one girl and then 3 boys. So that fourth child, and I'll diagram it for you, you have a number one girl, and then you have 3 boys. And I'll just do this in the proper color for you. This is a pattern of girl, like a number one girl, but a boy behind a girl is also called number one son, but he's in what's called the second position behind a girl. Then we have the second son, but he's also in a position called number 3 behind a girl first. All of these variations make a difference. So we'll be able to see the genetic pattern, which is, this is a sequence, but we can also see the gender number. So this is the second son, the third son. Then we get to see the social dynamics. Later on we'll modify this because maybe they actually adopted a boy, and we'll have various symbols like an arrow coming down, how the family adopted an older boy. How does this affect the determination of the genetic sequence, which it doesn't? How does this affect the social or gender number? All of these are variables in the system. Now, for now, this is not essential that we go into all the variables. This is designed to help you see that there are specific universal qualities for each one of the 6 girls, each one of the 6 boys. And one of the fun things is to be able to look at the body type of each child and see if the position they occupy in the family actually matches their body type. When you get really good at this, which by the way doesn't take much practice at all, you can go to the local mall and watch people walk by and pretty much look at their body type and practice what their position would probably be in the family tree. It's a lot of fun to ask a person or friend or maybe a waitress at a restaurant, say, I have a question to ask you. Are you the first daughter or the second or the third? Which one are you? This creates a communication, an understanding, and now you're starting a dialogue based on wanting to know somebody a little more. And that's useful sometimes or not. So the whole study of the birth order pattern is a wonderful way to be able to know yourself and your family. So for now, the data about number one, we could talk for an hour, and we will. We will do case studies on lots of different forms of number one girl, number one boy, all of them. We'll get to them one at a time, and you'll be able to see how the exceptions of when a number one girl loses a father, or the father's mother's been gone, or the mother's not in the house, all these variations about how it affects each one of these children. If you affect the number one girl here, you affect all of her sisters behind her. One of my most interesting case studies is I had a mother come in for a consultation who had 6 sons. And they all matched this pattern beautifully. Then the very next consultation I had a mother with 6 sons. But the difference was, on the second one, when she was pregnant with her 6th son, the father died in an airplane crash. And you could see, with the absence of the father, how it shifted the characteristics of each one of the brothers, and it shifted their body types and personalities. Even though they had the genetic number inside of them, their social dynamics was changed by the loss of the father. When you begin to see and understand this, you can see why certain behavioral symptoms, certain physical symptoms are the result of these polarity imbalances, oftentimes precipitated by the loss of a father or a mother, or even grandparents. Yes, that's right, grandparents do affect the personality flow of each one of these children. Now, this is part of the introduction to birth order. Eventually we will go through and describe all of these in much more detail. But remember, be patient about this. You can ask questions. You can send questions on the Facebook Radiant International group, or you can send questions directly to me through radiant.com, and I will gradually get to each one of the questions as best I can. So go out and test it. Just go out and start with number one girls and number one boys. Take a family that has 2 boys. Just 2 boys, and just describe the difference between these 2 boys, and watch. Ask questions and feel. Then look at the difference between girl number 1 and girl number 2. Now come on, most of you are already doing it with yourselves in your own family. But wouldn't it be nice to know the birth order of your mother and your father and how they related to their own families? You're going to have a lot of fun doing this, and it will change your heart, and hopefully it'll change your soul as well. Be well. Talk to you next time.